is preparing educational materials for African school children. And she should be very well known in this community. There are some schools that are using her materials, but there need to be more because she's done an outstanding job. My brother, John Windom, who gave decades to the St. Louis public schools. My cousin, Monica Tyson, who is a stylist to the stars, and to other ladies who would like to do more than just cut their hair off like I did. And my cousin, my niece Jasmine, John's daughter, who is making her own hair care products and a very productive lady. My cousin Patricia from Edwardsville and her sister Nola Williams from Edwardsville. They have come across the state, across the state line to be here. Come on in, honey, have a seat. And Mr. Mentry, who I just met last week, because he is a volunteer with Bernie Hayes' show, television show, and who my brother tells me is a fantastic drummer. He said, "You are so good." So I hope one day I get a chance to hear you drum. And I think we should congratulate ourselves for 50 years after we lost one of the greatest leaders that African America has ever produced, that we are here to honor his birthday and to hold, oh, I'm sorry, you know, you all look a little bit alike, but I confuse, it's Calvin, isn't it?
Yes.
Calvin Sr.
Yes.
for Mr. Mentry. Now, can you see you all look a little bit alike?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I
they
don't
do.
see it.
But that was no excuse.
No.
That was no excuse.
Good.
You're the fantastic drummer, my brother told me.
Oh, you thought I was the drummer?
Yes,
I'll take that
because I
credit.
was thinking that you were Mr. Mentry and Mrs. Mentry. And I'm glad to see you come to, because I've been coming to your programs. I'm glad you come to mine. And so it's special to survive 50 years after any major event. This is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm. But today is his birthday, or was his birthday. And I was privileged to get a chance to know him, having gone to Ghana late in 1962. And I was living there when he came in 63, 64 rather. And I had met him once in the United States because my friend, Essien, was writing his PhD thesis on the Nation of Islam. He was a political science doctoral candidate at the University of Chicago. So I went to the temple to tell him what went on the women's side of the temple, because you went in through separate entrances and you sat separately. Women sat separately from the men. And one time only during those months that was in 62, one time Malcolm came to speak in Chicago. So we were at the temple and he was 4 hours late. He had been doing something in some other part of the country and it was 4 hours late when he arrived. So we were tired, it was night, everybody was tired. But he was such an electrifying orator that we woke up and we listened to him for 2 or 3 hours. And at the conclusion of that presentation, I just had a chance to shake his hand like everybody else did. No conversation. But I was an adherent of his. I respected him for what he was trying to do in the nation. By the time he left the nation, I was already in Ghana, having left the States late in 1962. And so when we heard that he was coming to Ghana, and we heard that from the international Reuters news service, that he was to arrive in Ghana, and they gave a date that he was due to come on April the 15th. And so we met planes, three planes, no, May the 15th he was due to come. And a group of us met three planes, but he was not there. He did not come until the following day. And he called Julian Mayfield, who was a writer from Washington, D.C., and who had been living in Ghana as a journalist for over 2 years, I think, by that time. And Malcolm called him to let him know that he was in town. And so Julian and Leslie Lacey, an African American from California who was teaching at the University of Ghana and who had started a Marxist forum, he and Julian came to my office that day and said they were going to take Malcolm for lunch and invited me to come with them. So I did. I was working at the Ethiopian embassy. And so we went, and Malcolm was traveling alone. No, not even one traveling companion. Now that would not happen today. Oh, that somebody of his stature would be going anywhere without someone accompanying him. But he was all alone, sitting at his hotel when we went over, and we took him to Julian's house. Julian's wife, Anna Olivia, who was a physician, had prepared a good lunch, and we just sat around talking, asking him questions about what was going on in the States, since all of us had been away for a while, what his plans were. We were very excited to know that after he left the nation, he had started two separate institutions. He had a mosque in New York where he would be the minister and would be teaching Islam. And then he had the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which was a political group. And that's what we were interested in. None of us was interested in the religious institution, but we were interested in the politics. And over the days that he was there, we discussed more of what he was planning to do and how we could assist him from Africa. And we formed, we were going to be the African wing of his organization. He had traveled in East Africa. He had been to Nigeria before he came to Ghana. And his mission at the time was to get at least one African nation that would file a petition with the United Nations against the racist treatment of African Americans by the United States government. So each place he went, he wanted to meet with the president, and he basically had met with the presidents. And so in Ghana, he wanted to meet with President Kwame Nkrumah, whose photograph is on that front wall out at the entrance to the store. And he wanted to know if we could help him arrange a meeting with the president. Now, Julian was editing a magazine that was a supporter of President Nkrumah, but he didn't have daily access to the president. None of us did, except for Shirley Graham Du Bois, who by that time was the widow of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. He had died the previous August, and Shirley was still in Ghana, living in the home that the president had provided for Dr. Du Bois and for her. She was in charge of developing Ghana's television. They did not want to have television that just bought programs from the US and from Europe and would put all of the white nonsense into people's heads. So she was developing programming that would be African in character, from Ghana and from other African countries. So she still had an important role to play after Dr. Du Bois had died. She was a writer. She produced several biographies of African and African American leaders. Very talented woman. She had started out as a theater producer. She wrote plays and had them produced in the States. before she and Dr. Du Bois were married. She is one of the subjects of this book, which has been published recently, Want to Start a Revolution? And it's covering women and the roles as a burgeoning scholarship on African American women. And this book was written by, edited by the woman you put me in touch with, Monica, Dale Gore, and two other people, and each chapter is written by a different scholar. The one on Shirley is written by Gerald Horn, who's the brother of Malika Horn, who used to be married to Alex Haley's son, Bill. Uh, Everybody's connected. So Shirley was quite a great woman. She died in 1977. Uh, but anyway, when we called her and asked her if she would arrange for Malcolm to visit with President Nkrumah, she declined. All she knew about Malcolm was what she had read in the American press, and it was all negative. She said he's a rabble rouser, and I'm not going to take anybody like that to see President Nkrumah. And we could not persuade her to change her mind. But then at one of the events for Malcolm, either the Cuban ambassador's party or the Chinese ambassador's party, they met and just fell in love with each other, talked for hours, and then the next day she invited him to her home. That's where I took that photograph of the two of them in her garden. She invited him to her home for lunch, and then they talked and talked, and she immediately arranged for him to have a private interview with Kwame Nkrumah. And that was quite eventful because that was the main reason that he had come to Ghana. Meanwhile, there were people knew Malcolm's name before he got there. So there were a number of groups that wanted to entertain him. Leslie Lacey's Marxist Forum had scheduled a presentation for him to make a speech at the university that week. The Ghana press people, we knew all of the editors of the newspapers in Ghana, they were going to have a soiree for him at the press club where he would have a chance to talk to all of the journalists in the area, and they would get a chance to ask questions of him. I was sharing a house then with Maya Angelou and Victoria Garvin, who also has Vicky has a chapter in this book too. She was a labor leader in New York, and she had gone to Nigeria to work for one of the politicians there for a couple of years, and when she completed that contract, she had come to Ghana to visit with Dr. Du Bois and Shirley, because she knew them well in New York. And then she decided to stay. And she was living at the YWCA where I lived. And then she and Maya and I decided to move out when they were raising our rent for the second time, I think, in a month. And so we found a house and moved out. So Vicky was instrumental in getting Malcolm to see the Chinese ambassador. She was teaching English at the Chinese embassy, and they fell in love with her there and invited her to come to China and teach English at the Foreign Language Institute in Shanghai. She did that in 1964.
Wow.
And she stayed for 7 years in China and then came to New York. When she left Ghana, she was kind of scared to go because it was illegal then for an American to travel to China.
Mm-hmm.
That was before Nixon and Ping Pong that opened up China to U.S. visitors. So she had one or two members of her family to come to London and meet her so she could get a visa in London. And just in case she wasn't going to be able to come back to the U.S., she would have seen somebody in her family before she went to China. And I love that. So she arranged for the Chinese ambassador to entertain Malcolm. The Chinese ambassador, Mr. Huang Hua, later on was a more senior person in the Chinese government. The dinner that he gave for Malcolm was really interesting because he showed us a film of Chairman Mao Zedong issuing a statement of support for the Afro-American struggle. That was the first of two statements that Mao Zedong issued supporting the struggle that was going on here in the U.S. and the dignity of that struggle. So you saw Mao Zedong in the film sitting at a long table of Chinese dignitaries and criticizing the U.S. strongly. And then they showed some footage, I don't know how they got it, of the civil rights struggle here in the States. Black people being beaten, being shoved into the backs of police vans, and the brutality that was going on in the South at the time was shown in this film. And then to give background, they had some film from probably 1925 showing black people cracking rocks. These were prisoners, and they were sitting down cracking rocks on the ground. Now, they may have done that in prison in the 20s, but they weren't still doing that in the 60s. And they looked like our gang characters. You know, they had on heavy woolen coats and caps pulled down over their faces, and we were almost laughing. We asked Vicky to suggest to the ambassador that they edit that film and take that stuff out because it was too old to be relevant in the 60s. But it was a sign of support. And that particular footage was used to show just how badly we were being treated sitting with a hammer cracking rocks. I don't know what the rocks were for. But the Cuban ambassador also entertained Malcolm. The press soiree was wonderful. All the journalists in town were there. And Malcolm was always at ease talking to people. And he described what he wanted to do when he came back to the States. And then they had dancing. Everything in Africa ends up with dancing. So you had wonderful musicians there, and we danced on into the night. And in his in the autobiography, Malcolm says that he wondered, why we were just having such a good time when we ought to be struggling. Well, he did not know what we had done in Ghana. And I don't think he appreciated the fact that when you're in somebody else's country, in Africa, as a foreigner, you can hardly do anything political. So what we did was always to support the Ghanaian government, but we had a big demonstration at the American Embassy. At the same time, in 1963, March on Washington took place, which happened to be the very night that Dr. Du Bois died. And so we marched with armbands honoring Dr. Du Bois. But we had a midnight march because there's a time difference between New York and Washington, and we had wanted to start our demonstration when the demonstration was starting in the States. So we marched at midnight just after Du Bois had died. Julia Mayfield's wife, Anna Livia, as I told you, was a physician. And that day, Maya and her former husband, Vusumuzi Maki, had been invited to the Du Bois home to have lunch. And while they were there, he became very ill. And Maya and Shirley called Julian's home to get his wife to come and attend to Dr. Du Bois. She was one of his doctors. I was at their house making picket signs for the demonstration that was going to take place that night. And so Julian left and went there, and then Dr. Du Bois died within a few hours. And the American Embassy in Ghana in those days was a wooden building, very beautiful building, built of local woods. It was one story on stilts, and it had a flat roof. We were marching around there for about half an hour in the dark. No street lights in, it was just dark. It took a long time for our eyes to adjust. Then we realized there were men on top of the embassy. The Marines were on top of the embassy. And I guess they would have been prepared to shoot us if we had done anything that appeared to give a problem to the embassy property. But at minimum, they were taking photographs. They didn't have to shoot anybody because we didn't have any intention of harming the property. So Malcolm did not know that that was our big thing that we had done politically the year before he came. But he did not know about that. But otherwise, we were really quite restricted in trying to do anything political because you get deported in Africa. If they think you're doing something that is going to interfere with the way they're running their government, they just put you out. And nobody wanted to leave. So Malcolm had just a whirlwind of activities. There was an ideological institute where Ghanaian political philosophy was taught, some distance from the capital. They invited Malcolm to speak. So we drove down there, and at the conclusion of Malcolm's speech, one of the American Peace Corps people stood up and challenged him, saying that he was hurting the U.S. by coming to Africa to criticize the United States. And boy, they chased that boy out of that building. And people surrounded him, Ghanaian students who were quite sophisticated politically, surrounded him, and he was scared because he could have been in danger. That was the only time I saw anybody trying to challenge Malcolm. When he spoke at the university in Accra, there was a large contingent of whites who lived in Ghana who had come, and they seemed to think it was going to be amusing. But when he got through talking about what white folk were doing to black people in this country, in South Africa, every place that they had come in contact with black people, they were a danger and killers. Nobody was laughing. Nobody tried to say anything, but they certainly were not laughing. At the conclusion of his visit, Julian, Maya, Vicky, a young woman from D.C. named Helen Darden, who I understand later on started a Miss Black America contest in D.C. We all went to the hotel to get Malcolm and take him to the airport. And we were at the old airport. How many of you have been to Ghana? Anybody else? Okay, this is taken in the old airport hotel veranda. That building has been torn down a long time ago, and they built a new airport. But we were warning him to be careful when he returned to the States. We thought the government was going to be the main source of the threat to his life. We did not understand what was really going on here. Oh, so that's why he has such a serious look on his face when I snapped this picture. A moment later, I took another picture and he had leaned forward, laughing. That picture's out of focus. But this one, I'm quite pleased with that. He was on his way to Liberia and then to Algeria when he left Ghana. And that was in May. In September, I was headed to Ethiopia to start a job with the United Nations. And we decided to go to Cairo because Malcolm was supposed to be in Cairo. And so that we would have a chance to talk to him again about what he wanted us to do and just how we were going to make this link up to help him with the Organization of Afro-American Unity. So Julian and his wife, Anna Levy, who's a Puerto Rican woman, they both passed away now, and Maya and I went to Cairo, and Malcolm wasn't there. David Du Bois, Shirley's son, was living in Cairo, and she moved to Cairo after the coup that overthrew Kwame Nkrumah in 1966. Oh, but we did not find Malcolm, so we were very disappointed. But you can't not have a good time in Cairo, so we had a good time. And then Maya, Julian, and Anna Lydia all went to Europe. I went to Ethiopia to start my new job. When Malcolm saw President Nkrumah in Ghana, Julian and I had gone with him, left him. He saw the president privately. When he came back to the car, he was very quiet, and it didn't seem like we should ask him what had gone on, so we didn't. And it took me some time to figure out that Nkrumah had declined to press charges against the United States, just as all the other African presidents did, because when you've got that almighty dollar and everybody wants it, you're not going to go against the United States government. So that clearly is what had happened, that Nkrumah had said something to him about the inability of any of the African governments to make charges against the United States. Now, when the autobiography, after Malcolm left, I wrote a letter back to friends in the States who were activists, quite long letter. In those days, you did not have photocopy machines. This is typed on a stencil. I don't know if young people even know what a stencil was, but it was a paper that actually your typewriter made holes in the paper, and you put it on a roller that was inked, and the ink went through the letter holes, and you could print on paper like this. Now, I was too broke to mail many copies back. I think I was able to send 11 copies back, and I asked people to make copies and distribute it to activists, but not to publish it. So people did do that. When the autobiography of Malcolm X came out, it was years before I could read it because I was so upset that he had been murdered that I didn't want to read the book. When I finally did, and I read the chapter on Ghana, and I saw some sentences described as headlines in African newspapers, and I looked at these purported headlines, I said, this looks like something I wrote, not like headlines from African newspapers. And I did not have a copy of my letter because my goods were still in storage in Africa. So I wrote to a friend in Chicago, Sister Christine Johnson, who was one of the great activists in Chicago and who had helped me learn about Africa. She and Kwame Nkrumah had been special friends when he was a student in the States. So she had been to Ghana several times, and she helped educate people who wanted to go. So I knew she was so well organized that she would be able to dig out my letter and send it to me, and she did. And so as I compared what's in here and my letter, I realized most of the chapter on Ghana is taken from the letter. The last page or two are from Malcolm's own journals. And it's without attribution, which I do resent even now. My name is in here as a member of the committee that helped organize Malcolm's visit, but the material taken from my letter is taken without attribution. And Malcolm had a copy of the letter, and I'm assuming that he gave it to Alex Haley as a reference document. And then Haley used it and just kind of changed things around and did not say where he got it from. Now, over the years, I've seen references to this letter in many books, and I've never known where people got the letter. As I said, I was very broke. I only sent 11 copies out, but each one had an individual salutation on it. Dear Christine, dear whoever, dear Granny and Grandpa. Finally, I just found out last year where the people got the letter, because when Manny Marable's book on Malcolm came out, he references it there and says that it was from John Henry Clark's papers in the Schomburg Library in New York. I didn't know John when I was in Africa. So it was Sister Christine who had sent it to John, because the letter said Dear Christine at the top. So at least that was a mystery solved, because a number of books do cite the letter. So I'm very glad that I sent this letter back. I wanted people to know how well Malcolm had been received, because we knew that the American government, trying to undermine Malcolm's influence, might just lie about what happened when he was in Africa. And I wanted something to at least highlight the things that he did in Ghana, the way he was received, the respect that was shown to him there. We saw Muhammad Ali. He came to Ghana. The morning that we went to get Malcolm, to take him to the airport, we were taking pictures outside the hotel, and Muhammad and his brother came down the path. They had been out for an early walk. They had gotten to Ghana the evening before, and Malcolm knew that he was there, but they had not seen each other in the hotel. So this was their only meeting in Ghana. And Malcolm, Malcolm loved Muhammad Ali. They had been very close when Muhammad was champ. And Malcolm said hello to him. Now it's like 6:30 in the morning. There's nobody out. Muhammad Ali and his brother alone. He could have said hello to Malcolm, but he didn't, because he had been instructed by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to have no contact with Malcolm. Wow. So he just turned up his nose and walked on into the hotel. And you could see it hurt Malcolm, but that was it. In the movie where Will Smith stars, they show Muhammad Ali castigating Malcolm for having betrayed Elijah Muhammad, and that meeting was supposed to have taken place in Ghana. I don't know if any of you saw that movie. It came out several years ago. That's complete fabrication. That meeting never took place. And I didn't like that they made up something to make Muhammad Ali look like he had criticized Malcolm. He didn't say hello to him. So after we were in Cairo and did not meet Malcolm, I went on down to Ethiopia and started my job with the UN. And after I was there for 3 or 4 days, I was having dinner in my hotel, which had 2 entrances, one from the front where you came through the bar into the dining room, and a side entrance that you could come in right off the parking lot into the hotel. And I was facing that side door, and the door opened, and in walked Malcolm. And I said, we were just in Cairo looking for you. He had been through East Africa, had met with Julius Nyerere, the president of Tanzania, and Kenyatta, and I think that was a meeting on a plane. I don't believe he was in the countries to meet them. And he wanted to meet the emperor. Haile Selassie was still on the throne in Ethiopia. And he asked me if I could help him arrange a meeting with the emperor, because he had been so impressed with what we had done in Ghana. So I only been here 3 days. I didn't know anybody who knew anybody who knew anybody who knew the emperor. So I told him, I know I cannot do anything to help you. He was there for 2 or 3 days, and he was unsuccessful in meeting the emperor. Then he left and went back to East Africa, and the only letter I ever got from him was one saying he was coming back to Ethiopia, and could I please try to arrange an interview with the emperor. I was not successful, though by then I had met somebody who told me the emperor had a doctor from the Caribbean And I had tried to call this doctor, but I was unable to reach him. I thought he might have been able to help Malcolm see the emperor. So he did come back to Ethiopia. I know he gave a speech at the University of Addis Ababa. I've never seen a transcript of that speech. And it must have been before I got to Ethiopia, because if he had done it after I was there, I would have gone to hear the speech. But somewhere there may be a transcript of that speech where he lambasted the United States. And of course, the reason the emperor would not see him was that they were clients of the U.S. too, all over Africa. You had folks who were just clients of the United States or of Britain or France, and the metropolitan countries still called the shots. So Malcolm had no chance to see the emperor. I had worked for the Ethiopian embassy in Ghana for a few months. And when I typed this letter, I did it on their stencils and ran it off on their equipment. Years later, I found out somebody in the embassy had given a copy of this letter to the U.S. government. And so it was in some of my file, the FBI file. And I don't know who did that, but somebody working for the embassy gave it to the U.S. And I found that out in somebody's book. You know, yeah. Yes, you know, back in those days, there was some very serious political and spy stuff going on. So you had to be a little bit careful. But I was surprised that somebody from the Ethiopian embassy had given the Americans my letter. Anyway, Malcolm stayed a short time during that second visit, and then he left, and I believe that's the time that he came back through Ghana, because there is some reference to a second visit to Ghana later in 1964. And the next thing I knew, he was dead. That happened in February of '65. And that was a tremendous shock. I happened to have been working in Nairobi at the time at a conference, and a friend came to the window of the building where we were working and stuck his head in the window and said that Malcolm had been shot and had died. And I just had to, I nearly collapsed. I had to go back to my hotel. But we were expecting that there would at least be an attempt on his life, but you really never expected somebody to just be murdered the way that he was. And this year, this year, when they commemorated the 50th anniversary of his murder, did any of you see the CNN show that they did an hour documentary on Malcolm, which featured Earl Grant from California, who was with Malcolm the day he was murdered, and Malcolm had sent him out of the Audubon ballroom to make a phone call. And Earl cried on the TV program. Did you see it?
Yeah.
Because he said, I let Malcolm down. Even if I had been in the room, I probably would have been shot in the back, because I would have been fixing the recording equipment. That was his job. And I might have been shot in the back. But he's still that upset. I called him after I saw the show. My other brother had taped it, and I got a chance to see it. But we were all really devastated by that loss, because it was a personal loss, but it was also just such a loss for the country and the world. During the time of that anniversary commemoration, that was that last year or this year, I can't remember exactly. But at any rate, it must have been last year.
This year.
It was this year, because Maya had died, and the Schomburg, where her papers are on deposit, did a small exhibit shortly after her death of some of her papers. And a friend called me from the Schomburg and said that there was a letter that mentioned my name, but only the first page of the letter. She didn't know where the letter had come from. But the person writing was asking Maya, where is Alice? I've written to her and I haven't gotten any answer. And when my friend read me this letter with a Mount Vernon return address on it, I said, that's from Malcolm. That's Malcolm to mine. I never got another letter aside from the one I mentioned to you from Malcolm. Oh, so I'm assuming that the government was covering his mail, and they just took whatever letters they didn't want to have delivered, because I never got the letter, and only because he wrote to Maya and asked Maya, where's Alice? I'm not hearing from her. And it was not something that was a big enough deal that Maya would mention it to me. And she probably didn't want to write about it because it's possible her letters were being covered too. That's the kind of thing you had to be careful about in those days. But it was a time of great ferment, a time when we really thought that things were going to get much better for black people because there was so much going on. And it was international. I took this picture the same day as that one. As I said, we were at the airport to see him. This was taken at the hotel before we went to the airport to see him off. And this happens to be the only picture of Maya and Malcolm that has survived up to today. So it's been printed in several books. She came back to the States hoping to work with Malcolm. She was going to work with him. And he was killed so soon after she got back that she did not have a chance to see him again. But those are some of the things that I like for people to know. Malcolm was a great leader, and his stature has grown despite the efforts of the government to minimize his influence. But since he is dead, he cannot actually be a leader. He only can live in our hearts and help to inform what we do. So the people who read the autobiography should be inspired to try to do some of the things that he did and to show the kind of courage that he showed and the love he had for black people and the dedication. Strong family man. He loved his wife, all those daughters, and he tried to teach black men that they should be protective of black women and raise their children properly, do the best they could to be good husbands and fathers. That was a big reason that the women so appreciated him. Many, in contrast to Dr. Martin Luther King, who on that point was telling people that they should be letting cigarettes be put on out on their bodies, that they shouldn't fight back no matter what was done to them. Many of us did not like that. We could understand the nonviolent philosophy, but we really were not prepared to be assaulted and not try to fight back. But Malcolm said, somebody hits you, you try to break his arm off. We like that better now. I'll be glad. Yes, and it was easier just to stay away from those folk. So if there's any discussion or questions anybody would like to put forward, I'll be glad to hear them. Yes, sir.
Did Malcolm ever talk about how long it may take for an African nation to partake in going to the UN to make a claim?
Well, because he was not successful in getting any president to say, I will do that, he just kind of let that drop, except that he did have the petition that was available, and he continued to talk himself. But I think that trip convinced him that he was not going to get an African nation to do it because they were clients of the Americans. But he did not want to come out and say that they wouldn't do it. So he just continued to attack the Americans himself. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Did Malcolm ever discuss his concern about the FBI or Hoover or any? Did he discuss the threat or anything like that?
Well, at that point, no, we thought his main problem was going to be with the FBI. He didn't think that. No, he thought it was going to be the nation because they were the ones who were already after him. And he just took the FBI for granted. He did, he had said that he had been poisoned in Egypt. Oh, and David Du Bois told me that he thought Malcolm had been poisoned. But when you're eating overseas, you can feel like you've been poisoned. And it was just the food. So I don't know if there was ever proof of that. Malcolm had also said, and I don't remember the times, whether he said this before or after he was in our crowd, that he did not believe the nation was capable of some of the things he had been subjected to. He said, because I taught them what they know. That could be interpreted as a bit arrogant. You don't really know what other people are capable of.
That line was in his movie.
Yes, and he did say that. But again, he never had proof of what had kept him out of France. It's possible that the American government was involved in that. But it might not have been like that. Like the the poisoning. Well, I was so sick so often in Africa that if I thought somebody was after me, I could have thought I was poisoned. But it didn't have to be that. David did think it had happened though. And David and Malcolm spent a lot of time together in Egypt. So that might have happened. But Malcolm was not going to let anything stop him. As I say, he continued to travel all alone. And if you really think people are out to get you, you get somebody else to go on the trip with you to at least watch your back. But he knew that the nation was going to be the real problem. There's still questions about whether there was FBI behind the assassination, because we know that the nation had been infiltrated to a pretty high level by the government. Yeah. But they had infiltrated all the black organizations. Every organization that was active during the 60s had some Negro FBI agents involved. Yes. And it's hard to, you can't dissect that. You never know for sure what the government was responsible for and what was just bad planning. Yes.
Out of the two books, which one, did you read Many Miracles?
Oh, yes.
Which one do you think was more precise?
Well, Menable's book is 600 pages. Yeah. And it was done with a lot of committee. It was a committee project. It does a very good job of putting Malcolm in the historical context, giving you the what was going on. I felt that it went too far in dealing with speculation about Malcolm's personal life and his sex life. I did not like that part of it at all. But the autobiography is, this is a much shorter book, and this was done while most of it was done while Malcolm was still alive and participating in it. So there may have been some things that he wanted to restructure about his life and highlight that you will get in this book that you won't get in Manny Marable's book. I think Marable's book is worth reading rather, because it is so comprehensive. But I was talking to a journalist out of New York a couple of days ago, and he says he believes that there are areas of Manning's book that were changed. He said the publisher held the book for 18 months, and Marable was sick during most of that time. So that some of the parts of that book may have been changed without Marable's even knowing that changes had been made, because he was so sick. He died the weekend that the book was released. And if he hadn't died, the Negroes would have killed him. Because a lot of people, including Malcolm's family, were very upset about some of that speculation about his sex life that's in the book. Yes.
Have you ever met his family in person?
I knew Betty, his widow,
Okay.
but I never met any of the children until Ilyasa wrote her book, Growing Up X, and came here to have a book signing at the Schlafly Library. She's been here twice, and I saw her both times. Betty, according to Ilyasa, Betty deliberately kept the girls away from people in the movement. Maya was one of the few people who got to know those girls. Most of us never met them, even though we went up to a resort in New York that black people owned in the early 90s. And they were doing a weekend tribute to Betty and the daughters. So they were expecting her to come with all of the girls. She came by herself. We did not meet any of the girls. I met his brother Wilford, who lived in Detroit. Wilford and his wife. I visited them 2 or 3 times. I met his brother Filbert only once. That was in Omaha, when they had a dedication of a historic marker for the place where his home stood. And they had a conference that day. So I met his sister, his brother Filbert, Wilford, Wilford was there. And I don't think Wilford's wife came to that. I met them in Detroit. So yes, I did meet some of his family. And I've only yet met the one daughter. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you.
Well, I have a, you and I have talked before about
Yes.
My experience in Africa, and I just, there's one observation I made there, and I just want to get your reaction to it. We visited, I believe it was somewhere around Kumasi. We went to a school for children they weren't over 14 years old. And one classroom I was particularly impressed with was the teacher was teaching 3 languages at the same time. And I thought it was amazing, especially because I've worked, I taught school in special school district, and I have some idea about, how the process works. And I was convinced after I saw that happen, teaching 3 languages at the same time in the same class. After that, I was convinced that black people can do anything that they want to do if they have the will to do it. And so I look at our education system here, and it tells me that we just haven't, black people, we haven't been able to muster the will.
Well, I think that's true. I never saw anything like what you're describing, teaching 3 languages at once, but I do know in Africa, in every country, you have so many languages being spoken that the average person can speak 5 or 6 languages, really just to get along in his or her own country. And that means that they have developed that facility for learning languages easily because they know so many to get from one border to the next. So that might ease the prospect. But I think you're right. Children will normally rise to whatever real expectation. Adults have them, and then once they get the habit of learning and not expecting things to come easily, then they're good students. Yes. Students in Tanzania, this has been about 20 years ago, they were so good at mastering these tests that the Europeans had developed that one of the crazy crackers actually wrote that these children might be aliens. And they could not believe that little black kids in Tanzania were that smart, but they were.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have a comment on
Yes.
that. I think was in South Africa a few years ago when I was there that they don't let me start making up languages, but every instruction or exchange that's informative or educational, like church, but not just school, but church also, had to be in two or three languages. So to listen to it and to look at it and not understand the one that wasn't English just seemed like to me when my son was in fourth grade in Northern Illinois, excellent schools, the teacher was pregnant, and I'm a parent volunteer, and there are 27 children. My son is 41, and I'm telling you, this is a memory from my child's school days. There are 27 children in the classroom, and there were four spelling levels going on at the same time. So, like, the spelling list was meeting the child where the child was, and I'm telling you, that's like probably having a family of 20 kids to me. I'm saying it looked confusing, and I think the multiple languages going on, how can you say it's a problem if that's what you live with? That's your norm, but that's what it felt like as an outsider, and absolutely the worst thing I've seen in education was in one of the Caribbean nations. You people know better than I do. It was one country where it's a Dutch property, okay, and it's right here in the Americas, but and downtown in their major city to go in a classroom and they're teaching the children in Dutch where English is the language of the land. Okay? Now that's an abomination. To be right there in the Americas and English is the language on the streets and they're teaching them in Dutch. Okay? As opposed to in English.
If you don't insist on respect for your culture, you're not going to get it when you've been colonized, because the colonizer wants you wrapped up in their culture. But that is crazy.
I have a question about your Ghana. Was Lake Volta there when you were there? The
Yeah.
dam and everything?
Yeah. Akasambo, the dam on the Volta River. Yes, it was
Yes.
there. It hadn't been there too long before I went in '62, but
Okay.
it was there. Yes.
Well, I went on a voyage with Semester at Sea. It was a global voyage. We left from Montreal and it included 14 countries. But by the time we left Ghana, I didn't like Presbyterians, and I am a Christian, and I started noticing when you're on a ship, you land at the old parts of a nation, and what I saw was religious institutions, Presbyterians, East Indian Company, and the Presbyterians were the bad guys. I mean that they own the land, and the reason I mentioned Lake Volta because it's beautiful. That's all I can say is, but you leave Accra and you go on the highway, and then you start seeing the fields. You're no longer in the city, and then you start seeing security because you're hitting the lake, and it's like Carlisle Lake. It's just beautiful, but you wonder, well, there's no public transportation coming out here, and then you get to the village, and it's like entertainment, and as far as I'm concerned, it's slavery. Where the people were separated, isolated for tourist attraction.
You'll find that all over Africa.
Yeah, but the property.
Like living museums. like a human zoo.
But then when we ate on whatever, it's the nicest properties I've been to anywhere, but it was just us.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
us.
Because you had the money, yes. And local people don't have the same amount of money that tourists have. You know. Did you have your hand up, Monica?
I did. In light of what's going on today, how do you, where do you see the similarities in that time and this time that's happening now? In light of Ferguson and Baltimore.
Well, that I'm very glad to see what's going on now, but this is not a movement of the type that we had in the '60s. The effort was to get the vote and to stop segregation. The focus on police brutality, I think, is very good, and it's going to be a long struggle. And when we think we've won it, we will not have won it. Because when you look back at our history, we've had uprisings before over police brutality. In Baltimore, in the '40s, they had riots about police brutality and killing black people, including a soldier who was still in uniform coming back from World War II. That was 1944 in Baltimore. In '68 in Baltimore, you had riots over the same thing. Now we're having riots once again over the police. And the police culture is such that they are entitled to kill Negroes. And many of them do not understand what this fuss is about. What, why didn't you think I became a policeman? The police department started in this country to control Africans.
Absolutely.
Either on the plantation, giving trouble to the plantation owner, runaways, or the free Africans. There were a number of cities that had large populations of free Africans, and they were seen by the whites as slaves without masters. So you had to have these police forces to control them, and that culture has survived the integration of police departments, which is amazing to me that you can get police departments with black and white officers acting in the same fashion. But there is a difference now with the social media. That's something that did not exist in the '60s. So I'm hoping that this will go on, and maybe there will be a permanent change, because the police are scared now. You have too many people with weapons now, civilians, which we didn't have in the '60s. A lot of people had their shotguns back then, but almost everybody's got some kind of a gun now. So that changes the landscape, and I'm hoping that we'll see some permanent change. But I say, look at the history. White folks are very good at retreating when they see a lot of heat, and they might even retreat on an issue for 2 or 3 years and come right back. With what they've been doing.
Alice, you said something a friend of mine said, in girlfriend telephone talk, that you said a word that she was bringing up a concern, and I'm going to say it. Most people are not students of the movement, and of course, I'm not speaking of this group, and don't have an understanding. But what my girlfriend was pointing out the other day, she says, you said it tonight, it was about the vote. And the voting rate has gone down. So that we're in the streets because we have to be, okay, because they've shot our children.
Yeah.
But the voting rate has gone down. And the voting is just the first step in that process. We are supposed to be holding those offices. I was telling one of my sisters, because I'm looking in newspapers.com in the 1880s and 1890s, and I'm tracing some people, okay? And it's like, they had to implement Jim Crow back then because black people were going to take over this nation. Those who were free and educated coming out of the Civil War, or just the pure hustle and this new nation west of the Mississippi, and that there were black people, there's some mighty black folks moving around in this nation in the 1880s and 90s and coming into the 20th century. I mean, like, you could see where they were gonna take over. Something had to happen. So it's the vote and it's the political offices, while at the same time you can't shoot our kids. You can't shoot my kid, but I have experienced also that the police is part of the judicial system. And it ain't no more better, and that is the way I talk, folks. It's not any better when you get to the courts. That the inequity exists when you get before the judge.
There's nothing
Yeah.
in it, there's no system in this country that is not designed in part to hold black people down. Every place you look, that is the reality. Now, white people don't want to admit that, and many black people don't want to admit it because it makes the enemy so much bigger if you realize that every institution in the country is designed to hold you down. But we are only 12% of the population of this country. And no matter how much we try to convince white folk that we love them, and most of us really do, oh, they're not buying it. They understand that life is tribal. When we say diversity, they hear, you want our good jobs. When we say inclusion, they hear, you want our good jobs. Go out and make some good jobs for yourself. Because we made these for white people.
All right.
And we may have to give you a few, but you're not going to get no fair share, even though a fair share wouldn't be more than 10%. You know, you're not going to get that. And as the economy changes and the good jobs are disappearing fast, the competition is such that even the black folk who believe we're now in a post-racial society, and the young white people are not like the old white people. But I don't trust young people until they get some children and an investment in making sure their kids are all right. If they have to fight your kids to do it, they're going to fight your kids. So I don't think we have looked at this in a really straight, sensible way, because we do not want to face the fact that we have created nothing for our children as a whole. We've created, they cannot come to us for good jobs because we have no good jobs to give them. We have not created anything, so we have to keep saying, go ask the white people. Let's go make them give up something. And the white folks say, well, as things stand now in this economy, or the jobs are going to shrink. Even Walmart had the nerve to say they losing profits. Biggest corporation in the world. But they say because the dollar is too strong, that their profits are going down. Where's our Walmart? We don't have anything. Anything of real substance, probably, my guess is we're probably under 2% of the jobs that black people have, they got from other black folk. That's not 2% of the jobs in the country, but 2% of the jobs we have. And most of them don't pay anything. So we need to be encouraging entrepreneurship. Since we're going to stay here, we're going to be living under capitalism. It's not going to change. It's not going to become socialism. Right. We need to be trained, not rearing children to pick cotton, because there is no more cotton to be picked. And many of our children are so deficient in their skills. That's really all they have to offer is cotton picking skills. And there ain't no cotton. So we need to be doing something that we're not doing. We need to discourage people from having children that they can't feed. Instead of saying the government should give you some more money to feed your kids, the government should be saying, what did Mr. put an aspirin between your knees. And keep it there. If you can't support no children, put an aspirin between your knees. While you get an education. And then you will be ready, perhaps, to support some children.
How tall was Malcolm X? How tall was
Was
he?
he 6'4"? Something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, 6'4".
Was he as handsome as your brothers?
Well, there's his picture.
Well, but I mean,
my
you.
brothers are fantastic. There's his picture. You make up, handsome is, to me, as handsome does. I thought he was a handsome fellow. But I think my brother, just look at that. Look at that. Look at that sweet face.
He's a cousin, see. So
I know.
he's gonna dominate this.
Well, is that everybody satisfied? Anybody got a different take on our situation as black people in America?
A different take.
Yeah, a different analysis than the one that I would make. And Jokey, you're working with black children in an African-centered school. What are you seeing?
Yes, ma'am. May I speak?
Yes.
Please.
Well, what I see is that until I'm working with children, but until we get grounded, I believe in who we are, who we've been. We will not know where we're headed because we're not grounded in who we are, our own. We don't value what we brought to the world. So if you don't know what you brought to the world, there is no way you can value it. So we must learn who we are. If we know who we are, we're going to treat you differently because you are me and I am you. So we will have a different world view. Our perspective will be totally different. Now we have to do some things, like you're saying, what are we leaving? What legacy are we leaving our children? What do we know about generational wealth? We spend our money outside of our community. Granted, we do not have a grocery store. We do not have the services that we need. So we have to change our mind about what we're going to do to help ourselves survive. How about starting your own store? Well, we have to support that store. We have to treat that store well. We have to let that store know, well, we need this. How can I help you get this? We can't just turn our back on the first mistake or 10 mistakes they make, because Macy's has made thousands of mistakes, and we keep going back. Snooks has made thousands of mistakes. We keep going back. So we must give ourselves a place of be kind enough to ourselves to recognize we have to care for ourselves. We are responsible for that. No one else. I don't expect anyone else to save my children but us. That's it. I don't expect. How can we send our children to the enemy, the oppressor, to be taught and expect them to come back and do something for us? How can we expect it? We must not send our children to the oppressor. The oppressor teaches them to stay oppressed. The oppressor teaches our children, work for me. You have no idea working for self. None. None. Zero. So you don't value yourself. Why would you? Why would the oppressor say, yeah, you're just great, you're wonderful, why would they say that? They will lose their power. And no one gives you power, you have to take it. Nobody's passing it out. So until our children and our children really are a mess because we are. We're a mess. We buy into many things that are totally against our own best interests. Television. How many times do they look at that? How many times do we look at Empire, Scandal?
It's good.
Yeah.
Or even waiting in line for the latest pair of Jordans.
Wait in line.
And just
Wait in
stuff
line.
that's not even worth it on a material
Is your name on the
level.
shoe? That's what I tell my little babies.
Right.
At 4 and 5, your name, they already know the little mark. But is that their name? Is that
Right.
their mark?
Right.
Why do they know that? They've been taught that.
Right.
So we have to change our minds about who we are, what we're going to put inside of ourselves, and recognize we are people of value. We are the first people on the planet. The Creator gave us everything we need. Everything. And we're going to misuse it? We're going to act like we don't know? We're going to raise children that are totally disrespectful, and we raise the most respectful children on the planet. White folks wanted us to take care of their babies.
Yes. And we did.
And we did.
And we taught them a lot.
Taught them a lot.
Yeah,
But we're going to let our children be out of control. We're going to not be the authority. We're going to let the other people say, nope, your mother better not talk to you too harsh. Your daddy can't stay there. And then we have to deal with relationships. Male and female relationship. Your point of don't have children till we do some other thing, critical. Because we must learn to build relationship. Many of the children are in families that are not functioning. They're not functioning because the male and female, they're fussing about what? They're falling out and hitting and fighting about what? You have a child or 2 or 3 or 4. Let's get busy on being civil. You like them long enough to do this. So we need to learn to have civil relationships. But you have to be taught to have relationships. You must be taught that. Black women are just negative in it. No, we're not. Now, some of us are. But we've been taught to do that. We are intravenously fed every day negative things about ourselves. And we function in that way.
And if you get upset or if you have an opinion, then you're angry.
You're angry. You're angry.
Well, we have a right to be angry.
I was gonna say I'm angry and I'm mad as.
Exactly.
But we are doing serious disservices to our children. What do you see teaching in an African-centered school? Do you think the school is making some progress or headed in the right direction? Speaking not just about your employer, but the concept of the school, is that going in the right direction?
Yes, ma'am. Speaking with I'm in the lower elementary in the Walimu, we call them Walimu means teacher. He's in the upper grade, 8th grade. And the 8th graders are about to move on to high school, various high schools. So he said, it would be wonderful if we could feed them to an African-centered high school. Because we have seen them grow from where they were at 5th grade to where they are at 8th grade. How they feel about themselves. I can carry bags into that school and they will come to me. Walimu, may I carry that? I'll carry it for you. That's how our children operate. They will come. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. They will. And these children, I don't know them. They're students in our school. So we know that we're making an impact. Language. Our little ones, we're learning Swahili. We don't know full phrases. We can't speak but they can count. They know the days. They know those kind of months. They know those. They know how to speak.
They want to learn another language.
Right.
Go on and go on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They learn those simple things, how to greet you. So those things will stay with them. It's just like saying to me, we teach them quotes, African quotes. So those things stay with them just like they learn Jesus wept. It stays with them if you teach them that. They never forget.
It is too bad that after the 8th grade,
Right.
there isn't an
Sure.
African-centered high school for them to go
Sure.
to. Do you
So
think
we're
the
certainly-
parents would support that if it were a possibility within the system?
Sure, because in the last 2 years, and particularly this one, we've been able to have an orientation for parents to really, when they come, understand what kind of school this is and what we're trying to accomplish here. So now we're beginning to get a solid parent group.
Okay.
So they're the ones going to the superintendent. They're the ones. So they're pushing harder to get, because some of their children are younger.
I'm ready to,
Right.
they want
So
them to go
they're
all the
younger,
way
so they
through.
want them to keep going. So that group is growing.
Well, that'll be good if that can happen.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was gonna comment and say that I think that having an African-centered learning Center is beneficial and it is a step in the right direction, or even having just an all black school. I went to school here locally, and I went to Cardinal Ritter, which is an all black Catholic school here, and I feel like even though it was a Catholic, it was a religious institution, they still incorporated African values, African principles. Like we had to know the Eguso Saba, and we learned about different Ghanaian principles. That they even had statues around the chapel, which just being in that environment have definitely been beneficial just to how I view myself and how I choose to work, as well as understanding my place in society. And I think that my classmates and my colleagues that graduated with me, they have a sense of do for self or wanting to have a business or going on and knowing who to represent just from being in a nurturing environment, because it is definitely different from well, I didn't have that experience because I went on to go to a black college, but some of my other friends, they went to like a high school where they were the minority. And, you know, our experiences and how we look at each other and ourselves are just like different challenges. They went through things that I necessarily, with racism, that I didn't have to go through because I wasn't in that environment where I was a minority. So I think even if it's, you know, if it's not African Center, or even if it's just us, it's all in
It does make a difference.
Yeah.
We've had family members who've gone through Cardinal Ritter,
Mhm.
and it shows even years later that
Mhm.
that influence has made them very capable. And they love the school, still love it.
That's right.
Once a lion,
Yeah.
always one. Yep, once a lion, always.
That's a parent of, you had two children in Pamoja, haven't you? Yes, so his children go to the school where Njoki teaches. Yes.
You know, when I hear the world, it's communication, and it really is um, a global and it's we have these concept in America of black and white. There's no truth in talking about America when you just say black and white, because that's not what America is. But I think that wherever the education is, and whatever is happening in our homes, and what our children are exposed to, and that which we put out, um, and I don't care what the language is, but you gotta talk the language. And I'm saying that we have to know that there is a language that's going to get you from point A to point B. It's not a world where anything goes. Yeah, anything goes, but you're not going anywhere in it. If you put forth anything, you know, your children need to hear language to the extent that when they go on some playgrounds, people are saying you talk funny. Okay? Because there's a place where that which is going to allow you to be successful. You can be as pretty as I am, but if I open my mouth and I don't have language, it's the people have seen enough of people that look like me that can't talk that they might not laugh, but I'm not going to get to the next step. You know what I mean? So we have to stress language communication, and we have to. You spoke of it totally, but we have to have communication among ourselves that makes sense. That
Well,
makes
yeah, and
sense.
that's education.
Hmm.
And I'm convinced it's having people at home who can talk to you. I meet many
Oh,
black
absolutely.
adults who I believe have just been told so often to shut up and sit down that they have a very difficult time carrying on an actual conversation because they have been rebuked so often. And I've heard parents talking to their kids, shut up and sit down, so that children don't get practice in talking. Not to even talk about whether the parents can talk, but do they let the children express themselves? And very frequently, we don't do that. We do have too many people who are under too much stress to be parents, but they are trying anyway. And they are creating children who are filled with rage. When you go into these prisons, and I used to work at the city workhouse, and I visited a number of prisons, including Cook County Jail, which I heard today has gotten a black female director. I can't believe it. There's 9,000 people in that place. And when I went there back in the 80s and met the director, who has since died, I remember he introduced me to an inmate who was bringing in coffee and said, "This is deuce and a quarter." He's serving 225 years for murder, you know. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But you've got these institutions full of enraged people, and very often it's boys who don't know who their father is. And the pain of that, see, human beings are not like dogs. Dogs don't care who the daddy is. But a human being, when you say, well, I've got a list here, maybe it was Jimmy, maybe it was Jake, should I call the Maury Povich show? And we can go on there and maybe we can find out who your daddy is. That's no good. Because those folks are ready to kill somebody because they are so hurt that their parents didn't have enough respect for the reproductive capacity to even make note. But Maury Povich is waiting. And he's so happy when the envelope says, "You are not the father." And the woman runs off the stage crying. And Maury goes and gets her and said, "That's okay, Bernice. You go get some more people and bring them back. We'll test them too." The worst form of human entertainment since burning at the stake. But that's where many of our folk are. Yeah. So I'm glad these two pictures I sell, they're $10 each. If anybody would like to have one of them, you can get one from me. And I thank you so much for coming. Yes, and joking.
No, I was thinking of a quote that we had today. Malcolm X is, we'll ask the children, what does Malcolm X say?
Okay.
And they say, Malcolm X says, you cannot separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom.
No kidding. I know in your library you've got the pictures around the wall with quotations on them, and I like that. That's wonderful. Keep planting those seeds.
I'd like to create a quote, but I'm gonna make it up as I go. Okay, now here we go, folks. Embrace, because I do want you to take this away. Is that my cousin Alice said, you know, we don't want to be picking the cotton. Teach our children to pick cotton. We might not teach our children to pick cotton, but please teach your boys and your girls to use a broom at home. At home. Did you hear what I said? I have, and in the literal sense, I have seen some children who don't know how to use a broom. Okay? And that, to me, that speaks volumes to your ability to have a clean act as you go away from home.
I would hate for you to see my house.
But see, you know what? You know what? You know what? I heard you speak about your trip to Africa in 1969. You're a woman who has had success and accomplishment. But teach your little children how to use a broom.
Yes, that's true. That's
okay?
Good.
That's my quote.
All right.
Oh, my name is Nola Jones Williams, but you can make it your own.
Get that
Well, thank you so much. I have enjoyed this.